Helping Seniors Television, all about improving quality of life for seniors. If you're a senior, know a senior, or plan to be a senior, then this show is for you. It's all about helping you develop your own aging plan so you can age actively and with dignity. Helping Seniors Television from the Helping Seniors Network of information, education, and resources.
I'm Kerry, Fink, and welcome to Helping Seniors Television. On behalf of Joe Steckler and our entire Helping Seniors family, welcome to Helping Seniors TV, where our purpose is to educate and inform and connect you to resources and ideas and concepts that are going to help you as you find your own aging plan. Our president and founder, Joe Steckler, has often talked about the importance of an aging plan, and I want to bring this to our attention first and foremost, even before we get into today's topic, which is going to be very educational, informational, and helpful, I think, to the growing number of seniors here in Brevard County. But, let me take a moment and introduce our guest, by the way, Traci Graf, who is a registered nurse, a psychiatric nurse, and you are also the head of Avid Home Care Services. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Kerry.
Joe has often talked about when we're young and coming up in school, they're always talking to us, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? What's your plan? What's your career going to be? What kind of job do you want? And then as we get a little bit older and we're in the working years, then everybody's coming at us with, well, are you setting aside this for retirement? Are you going to buy a house? Are you going to put your kids in college? What's your idea? So they're always telling us we need a financial plan. And then as we get into our retirement years, maybe we saved well, maybe things happen along the way and we weren't able to save well. But in all cases, we need an aging plan. So in other words, once we get to that point in life, do we have a plan for the road ahead? And I think that's what Joe keeps encouraging us to talk about. And one of the reasons why getting this information out is so important because, aging is really on-the-job training. We're not there until we're there. Joe is 86 and he takes a knocking and keeps on rocking. But he says aging is not for the faint of heart because there's a lot of things in there.
Right.
And Tracy, you have been involved in the medical profession for decades. And so you really know this whole part of it even better than I do. And I was just going to say, as you run into people and you help people within home care through Avid, you must see a lot of that where maybe a little planning could have gone a long way at the right time.
Definitely. We see a lot of situations that probably could have been prevented if they had either approached the situation a little differently or been more proactive about getting some help. The topic we're talking about today, dementia, can be very insidious. People sometimes do not know it's happening.
Yes.
Adult children can speak to family members on the phone every day sometimes and never pick up on it.
I was going to ask you about that because the title of our show today is we're going to talk about the dirty D word. And D in this case means dementia. And, as sort of a person that doesn't have the level of expertise or experience or knowledge that you do in these areas, one of the things that I think is fascinating is that for those of us, we all think everything is Alzheimer's because that's the word that we all know and are familiar with.
Sure.
But what we're going to talk about today is there's a lot of levels and there's a lot of intricacies to all this. And maybe we start at the very top. When somebody says, oh, yeah, this older relative of mine, they have Alzheimer's. And then that's just like the catch-all phrase that we use because we just don't know the intricacies.
What it is,
yeah.
Right. And I encountered a person recently that told me that his wife had Alzheimer's dementia. And typically what I will do is ask a few questions and explain to them that Alzheimer's dementia can be seen on MRI now. We can actually see the plaques that we know causes it. But more importantly, a lot of times it's diagnosed based on behaviors. And there are some behaviors, when we look at all the different types of dementia, that are very specific to certain types of dementia. So, for instance, Alzheimer's patients are very well known for wandering. Out of all of the different types of dementia, they are the number one patient that tends to wander.
Wow.
And the statistics for finding them are really not very good. Really, I think I wrote another article about Brevard County has a safe locator program through the sheriff. And if you have a patient who you live at home with Alzheimer's, it might be a very good idea to look into that.
Yes.
You can find it on their website. But, you know, that's one of the typical things that Alzheimer's patients will do is they will tend to wander. And the statistics for finding them alive after they've wandered are I think it's only 30%. It's kind of shocking how few are actually found alive.
Wow.
So it's really important, you know, I think as a nurse, that if you see typical signs of Alzheimer's occurring, you have a parent who you discover one day has attempted to leave the house and go to work. They haven't been to work in 20 years.
Right.
They're talking about the bus they rode, the route they took, the corner that the bus stop was on, and what time they had to be at work. That should be like red flag, red flag.
Right.
And you should act then.
Right.
You should not wait for it to happen again.
Right.
You should not wait for it to get worse. You should not just say, well, maybe this is just a one-time thing. If you really want to protect that person, you should act.
You should need to get
because
involved.
People don't just randomly do stuff like that.
Right.
That kind of behavior is very specific to an Alzheimer's diagnosis.
So it would be okay if we just back up a moment, because I want to ask, so I have often, because not knowing better, used terms like Alzheimer's and dementia interchangeably. And so I'm probably saying that incorrectly, but could you help sort that out so that we're using the right word in the right place when we're talking about people? Because, you know, we work with a lot of organizations that provide memory care. And to me, that probably is the better umbrella term, right? Because all of these things are memory care. But specifically, if somebody mentions Alzheimer's or dementia and uses those words interchangeably, that's probably not medically correct.
It's not at all. Alzheimer's is a form of dementia.
Okay.
But there are multiple types of dementia. And Alzheimer's is the most common one. And it's the one that unfortunately we're seeing more and more of. I think with our diagnostic techniques and our specialists who now get involved with things like that, I think we're definitely seeing more of it. And unfortunately, there really has not been a whole lot of advancement in what to do about it.
Right.
That's the sad part. You know, I honestly have a very good friend whose mother died young from Alzheimer's dementia because it will actually end up being their cause of death.
Wow.
They literally end up where they forget how to swallow and how to breathe and how to do literally how to breathe.
Wow.
And it's a very sad demise. Many times they do end up in facilities because another behavior that goes along with Alzheimer's dementia a lot of times is aggressiveness. They tend to be somewhat aggressive, and sometimes they will get physically aggressive. That is typically what prompts their placement into a facility.
Right.
And that's where they will stay till the end of their lives.
So that's when we're talking about Alzheimer's. So what I hear you saying, and tell me if this is not correct, but dementia is kind of like the overarching term that may encompass Alzheimer's or some of these other specific types of dementia that we're going to be talking about on today's program.
Correct.
So I was having an interesting conversation with a board-certified an audiologist. He really knows his craft. And he was talking to me. He said, I'll have people come into our office, and he said they will talk about the fact, this is my mother. She has dementia. And so, as you're talking to her, understand that while you're checking her hearing. And so when they go through the process of checking the hearing, there's a place where he does some hearing tests, but then he trial fits some hearing aids, and all of a sudden, now the person is responsive because it wasn't a dementia issue. It was simply a hearing issue. And I want to talk about that when you suspect that, maybe I'm getting concerned mom isn't responding the way that I remember that she would. And I guess it's particularly acute if you're a person who maybe flies into Florida, goes back home and you just see your parents every so often. What are the things that we would look for a loved one to say, we need to scope this out a bit?
Well, I do think, evaluating their hearing is probably a really good idea. I guess it would also, though, depend on what kind of behaviors you're seeing. If there's a lot of, let me think about that. So if there's a lot of, when they're not answering questions appropriately, or, you ask them a question and they answer it with something completely different, those kind of things, I would be suspicious that there might be some hearing loss issues going on. If they're doing some of these other things that we've talked about, it's usually not hearing loss. But it is, like we talked about before we came on, it is part of the process that is evaluated when mental capacity is decided. Are they able to hear? Are they able to see and read? Are they able to understand what is being said to them? Because, like I said to you, when we're deciding on mental capacity, we may not agree with the person's decision. In our opinion, it may be completely nuts. But the decision-making process is what the court and the doctors evaluate. And if the decision-making process is solid, then they're determined to have mental capacity, and you're allowed to make your own decisions, even if they're bad ones. Right.
So that's an interesting question, because as we get down and we start drilling down into the types of dementia, the things that we're looking for, I mean, we wrote in this lots of things. We've written down Lewy body dementia, vascular dementia. I'm not even sure I'm going to say this one correct. Frontotemporal dementia.
And that's a scary one. I mean, I tried to cover some of the most common ones in this article. And just try to give a little picture of what that behavior with that diagnosis looks like. Because as you see, they are all a little different. In their detail.
You mentioned, like, for Lewy body dementia, you're talking about that it's actually mineral or some kind of protein deposits causing chemical messages in the brain that are causing memory loss. You say disorientation, sleep disturbances, hallucinations.
Very specific hallucinations, too. I mean, you have to think about how the brain communicates. It communicates via these pathways, and it jumps across. Think of them like roads, but they have these little gaps that they have to jump across to communicate. And when we get these Lewy body protein deposits, which can be seen on MRI, and they're like roadblocks in the road. And so the communication is interrupted. And disorientation to an absolutely terrifying degree. Hallucinations that without a doubt make people unsafe to be alone. We live in Florida. Everybody has pools. People have waterways around them. People are at high risk for, we know a client who drowned by reacting to a hallucination and falling into the canal, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness.
Very sad end for an individual that we liked very
And that's
much.
why getting the diagnosis and putting in, once you understand at least what you're battling, then you can start to make plans to...
So, and that's people kind of saying, well, what's the point? If you can't treat it, there's nothing you can do about it. Well, any neurologist or doctor that specializes in memory care will tell you, those drugs work more effectively the earlier they're started. The problem with starting those drugs early is that people in their 50s and 60s and even 70s don't really want to go to the doctor and be evaluated for a memory issue.
Right.
Myself included.
Sure.
Because they might find something.
Yeah.
Let's be serious.
It's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought.
Right.
And, so what the point of getting a proper diagnosis, in my opinion, is not only about the medications, because some medications work better on certain diagnoses, and some of them are more of, it's a management issue at home. Vascular dementia.
Let's talk about that. You say this is the second most common. You say this is like up to 20%, and it can be caused by multiple issues like strokes or hardening of the arteries.
Right. So this is a problem with the vascular system in the brain. It has hundreds of thousands of tiny little veins and arteries. And arteries are carrying the blood that has oxygen in it.
Right.
So what happens is the tiny little arteries and the smaller arteries are getting blocked. They're closing off. So instead of being open all the way, they're only open to here. So all the tissue up around the part that no longer is open or is clogged with plaque is becoming deprived of oxygen.
Got it.
And when you have multiple of these little tiny vessels depriving brain tissue of oxygen, the brain tissue starts to die.
Wow.
So now, and you have brain tissue dying in the outer cortex of the brain, which is where most of our voluntary actions come from. It's the deep brain that is the involuntary actions that control our body. So you will see a lot of personality changes, unfortunately. Wow. A lot of falls will come from people with vascular dementia.
Wow.
They are at very high risk for falls because when we stand up with the blood, with the way our vessels in our brain are, our blood shoots to our brain and supports the brain as we stand.
Right.
With them, it can't. It tries, but only gets so far. So they get dizzy and boom, down they go.
Yeah.
So with someone like with vascular dementia, some of the things that are very helpful to teach family are, make sure they're extremely well hydrated all the time. We have many times, as a home care nurse, I many times would advocate and go to a doctor and say, we're tracking this patient's blood pressure and it's in the 110s over 60s. That's perfect in your opinion, but for somebody with his diagnosis, we found that when it's in the 130s over 80s or 90s, he's actually more with it.
Wow.
Because there's more pressure pushing the blood to the brain.
Okay.
So you have to, it's kind of like a balancing act, but there are ways of dealing with the specific behaviors and symptoms that come from each type of dementia, which is why, in my opinion as a nurse, the diagnosis part is important.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk about the one that I'm having trouble saying.
That's the scariest one.
Frontotemporal dementia.
Yeah.
And it says it can occur in patients as young as 40?
Yes.
Wow.
So this is one that I think we're seeing more and more of. And the frontal lobe of our brain is a major controller of our personality and our decision-making processes. So when we see people with that kind of dementia, it will many times present as a person making a lot of very impulsive, compulsive decisions.
Wow.
Suddenly selling a house or suddenly buying a house or suddenly, selling everything they own to go live on a boat somewhere. I mean, something that some people may think, well, maybe he's got a midlife crisis,
Right.
Maybe. Sometimes that's not what it is.
Wow.
And what happens is those people end up actually a lot of times in trouble where they've made a decision that has gotten them in some kind of legal trouble.
And that's where it
starts to be evaluated of what exactly is going on here.
Yeah.
And this diagnosis comes out, and many times it comes out from a psychiatric evaluation, because of the changes in the personality and the behaviors and the decisions that they make.
So oftentimes, Tracy, you talk to patients, and you said you've actually used the dirty D word, dementia, when you're actually talking to somebody directly.
Yeah, I think that many times it's not an easy word to use when you're talking to a patient sometimes. It's a diagnosis that the doctors talked about it to the family, but nobody has sometimes mentioned that actual word to the patient. And I find that when I say to them, that I get it. I know it's like a dirty word. I get it. It puts them at ease and it makes them more comfortable to talk about it rather than worried that I'm evaluating everything they're about to say to me, which I am, but they're much less aware of it.
Right. And everything that I'm learning from you as we're having this conversation is that the importance of getting this early diagnosis is important so that we're not just using this word generally, but we're trying to see, because it seems like the way you might approach making a patient the most comfortable and the most successful, even given one of these conditions, is going to be understanding, which aspect of dementia is in play, and then what then the safety precautions and the right things to do to make it all work as best as it can, given that, is what's so important.
Right. Yeah, it's not an easy thing to be diagnosed with. I understand that. It has implications for people's, for some people's professions.
Sure.
If you're a pilot or, something in the military, it could force an early retirement if it's diagnosed.
Absolutely.
So, I think that is definitely part of, there's a huge stigma associated with it. And that is part of the problem with getting an early diagnosis. It's a multi-leveled issue with getting that early diagnosis.
So if we're concerned about a loved one and we're saying, like, some of these things aren't really adding up and I don't really know what my next step would be, what is that? Would you sit down and talk with a primary care physician? What would be the steps that you might take if you're trying to look after a loved one? It could be your spouse.
I think that would be the first thing I would do, is I would approach the doctor who knows them the best.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they have some kind of established relationship with a doctor who you could at least go and say, I know that he may seem okay when he comes to see you, but I'm noticing some strange things that I'm a little concerned about. I think that would be the first doctor that I would approach and see, where do they want to go? Do they want to maybe, have them do an MRI? Do they want to send them to see a neurologist? There are avenues to take that are not necessarily drastic, but again, it's really going to be trying to overcome this obstacle of, will they be accepting of a diagnosis that ends in dementia, regardless of what the first part of the diagnosis is.
That's interesting. And we wrote down here, you said you were even talking about patients with Parkinson's disease can also develop dementia with, you call it paranoia, speech difficulty, and depression. And talk a little bit about that.
We have been seeing more and more these days of these patients that develop a type of Parkinson's that also has a very serious dementia attached to it. And it appears to be quite aggressive. And they present basically like an unstable schizophrenic with Parkinson's disease.
Wow.
They are, I would have to say, the most challenging patient I've seen to take care of in the last 10 years of nursing.
Wow.
And we're seeing more and more of them.
Wow.
Even the medications, I learned a lot from a client that we had not that long ago who unfortunately did eventually pass away from the Parkinson's. But I learned a lot in sort of trying to help her son advocate for some of the medication changes, because what happens with those patients is, Parkinson's, we typically give people a synthetic form of dopamine. Dopamine is a hormone that our body likes, our brains like it. It's a good feeling hormone. People who have Parkinson's, we know, are either low in dopamine or they're not utilizing the dopamine that their body is already making. Okay. So we give them a medication called Sinemet or levodopa, and it is a synthetic form of dopamine.
Okay.
We give it to them multiple times a day. What we're finding is that by increasing their dopamine levels, we're increasing their hallucinations.
Oh, wow.
They're having more hallucinations, these people that have this dual diagnosis.
Wow.
So now you have this battle between using the Parkinson's drugs and an antipsychotic in sort of a perfect balance.
Trying to get those really balanced up.
And it is not easy. It is really not easy. And I never saw this patient really achieve. There was a point where we could no longer become stable. We could no longer stabilize her with those medications. And hospice had to come in and start to sedate her.
Very difficult.
Very difficult. And a very challenging patients to take care of, because I mean, they can't sit still. They're constantly reacting to visual hallucinations that they're seeing. I was present in a client's home one day when she started talking about some kind of war jeeps she was seeing on the beach, and she lived in a beachfront condo, and all I could see were the sliding glass doors in front of me with the balcony.
Right.
They will react. They will react to those hallucinations. Sure. We see clients fall out of wheelchairs and fall off of scooters and fall out of chairs. And a lot of times that's what they're doing.
So the good place to begin with all this, and we're just about out of time on this, but the good place to begin is make sure we're having these conversations early on. And one of the things you guys do as Avid, I want to talk about that and get you to give the phone number, because you guys are skilled at being able to work with people on many different levels, and your own background can help a family find the right fit of where they are in terms of needed care. So let me have you give the phone number to reach Avid Home Health.
It's 321-392-3400. And one of the benefits to having a regular caregiver come in is sometimes the caregiver is who notices this behavior that isn't quite normal. And many times they'll come and say something to me about, I'm noticing this person doing such and such, and I'll reach out to the family if we have to. My husband and I experience many times confusion. Clients will start having confusion about paying their bill.
And having somebody on point that is familiar really is a help. One more time, the phone number, and then we'll go.
321-392-3400.
All right. Well, thank you, Tracy, for sharing this important information on the dirty D word. On behalf of Joe Steckler and the Helping Seniors TV crew, thanks for joining us today.
I'm Joe Steckler. Thank you for joining our program today. I'd like to remind you that our senior information line is available to you at 321-473-7770. There you can get help and direction that could be helpful for your specific situation or circumstances. The work of helping seniors is very important, but we can't do it alone. That is why our sponsors here in Brevard County are so important. I'd like to thank our many area sponsors, businesses, and medical providers who support the mission of helping seniors that help us carry the cost of our media efforts. If you'd like to join us either as a business partner or simply donate as an individual, we would welcome your call at 321-473-7770. You are always welcome to visit our website at www.helpingseniorsofbrevard.org. Thanks so much for your help. It does make a difference.